Our nation's first people are oppressed under the current social conditions in Australia and suffer significant disadvantage in almost all measures of Western wellbeing, commonly referred to as the gap. They experience significant disadvantage in the areas of health, education, employment and income, and housing, and are overrepresented in the criminal justice system. Australian public attitudes towards Indigenous people and issues have been surveyed since at least the late 1960s, and throughout this time they've been viewed negatively. This widespread negative attitude towards Indigenous people is complexing when statistics show that less than 1 in 10 non-Indigenous Australians knows and mixes regularly with Aboriginal people, and about half of all non-Indigenous Australians do not know any Aboriginal person personally. Through this documentary, we'll explore these negative attitudes and associated stereotypes, as well as questioning how these attitudes were formed and the impact these views have on Indigenous people. Stereotypes are defined as a collection of ideas someone has about another individual or group that influences how they interact with them. There are a plethora of stereotypes surrounding Australia's Indigenous people, and the following clip shows stereotypes Indigenous people at the University of Sydney encounter.
Stereotype that needs to stop. Well, that's hard. There's more than one, but...
Yeah, there's plenty. Petrol sniffing, all blackfellas on the dole. Yeah, the list goes on.
We get stereotypes all the time. I hear it every day. We had one just yesterday. You get free stuff from the government. I wish they paid my university degree. I still wouldn't have a headset. And wish they gave me a car like people think we get cars or free hormones. This goes going on and on.
All Indigenous people are drunks, and that they, live in the bush and they don't know how to live and they can't live in houses.
We sleep in parks. Like, I sleep in a house,
Research shows that many people accept these stereotypes, which are referred to in studies as false beliefs, as they've been proven to be untrue, and yet a significant amount of non-Indigenous Australians still believe them. This brings us to our second point of exploration, how these attitudes have been formed. Considering half of non-Indigenous Australians don't personally know an Indigenous person, it is safe to assume that most people form their attitude from the media. This is harmful as, according to the latest census, media and telecommunications is the most underrepresented industry for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, thus showing how easy it is for the media to perpetrate these false beliefs. The creation of attitudes can be explained through the tri-component model that links the cognitive, affective, and connotative aspects of attitude formation. If a person believes a stereotype such as Indigenous Australians get given cars from the government, this cognitive component makes them feel angered and jealous, the affective component, and therefore they'll treat Indigenous Australians with contempt and racism, the connotative component. Research shows the more formal education a person receives, the less likely they are to have negative feelings towards Indigenous people. The increase in education is linked to increased awareness about Indigenous history, and therefore an increased tendency to question these negative stereotypes and to feel more empathetic. This shows how important the cognitive aspect of the tri-component model is, as those more informed show less prejudice towards Indigenous Australians. Another interesting point that attitude research raises is the cognitive dissonance between egalitarian belief systems and willingness to endorse social actions to address inequality. While there's a majority agreement among non-Indigenous Australians that Indigenous people remain unfairly and disadvantageously positioned, these same people also believe that their disadvantage doesn't justify extra government assistance and that granting land rights is unfair to other Australians. This shows cognitive dissonance between the idea that Indigenous people are disadvantaged, the cognitive component, and yet actions to lessen this disadvantage are unfair and need to be prevented, connotative component. Many people in this study chose to ignore this inconsistency or try to justify the contradiction to lessen this feeling of dissonance. Now that we know how these stereotypes and attitudes have come about, we can explore the effect they have on Indigenous people. An obvious and direct impact belief in these stereotypes have is on instances of racism, with racism in everyday life being experienced by 43% of Indigenous Australians compared with approximately 25% of other non-Indigenous Australians. Indigenous Australians face this racism in many forms, personal, casual, and institutionalised. And although there is a lack of information regarding the impact of prejudice and racism on the well-being of Indigenous Australians, research from the South Australian Health Commission suggests that the perception of hostility from the outside community is significantly related to Indigenous mental health problems, suicidal behaviour, non-prescribed drug use, police problems, and prison experiences. Further, in one Perth study, results indicated that almost half of a sample of Indigenous children aged between 8 and 12 years old perceived that the wider community did not like them. This research highlights the immense impact negative attitudes have on the marginalised group, highlighting the need for the wider society to challenge these false beliefs and reflect on how their own attitudes and actions impact Indigenous Australians.